You're not supposed to, you heard Jim? Huh? You cut the lights off.
The moment that door splintered under Jim Jones' boot, this stopped being entertainment and started looking like exposure. Surveillance cameras don't lie. And when 50 Cent pushed that footage out to the world less than 24 hours later, timestamp, hallway angle, repeated strikes until the lock gave way. He wasn't just posting a viral clip. He was framing a narrative. This is what's really happening. 50 understood that a visual of a man forcing entry hits harder than any caption ever could. Psychologically, audiences respond to imagery over explanation. At a human level, seeing someone kick in a locked door triggers instinct, conflict, desperation, urgency. But here's the colder layer. According to the lease termination notice he attached, the tenancy had allegedly expired weeks earlier. If that timeline holds, then the footage isn't just dramatic, it's strategic ammunition. Now critics will argue we don't know the full legal context, that termination notices and actual eviction enforcement are not the same thing. That's true. New York commercial tenant law is procedural and slow. But perception doesn't wait for court filings. In one post, 50 shifted the story from podcast beef to access revoked. And that's where the power dynamic started to tilt.
You're not supposed to, you heard Jim? Huh? You cut the lights off.
Then came the escalation, and this is where it turned surgical. 50 didn't just leak footage. He layered it. Multiple camera angles. A lease default notice dated weeks prior. And then the knockout punch. A photo with the building's owner, claiming partnership and partial ownership. In a single afternoon, the narrative evolved from embarrassment to dominance. Based on past patterns in public celebrity disputes, when conflict shifts from words to assets, public perception shifts with it. Ownership reads as authority. Infrastructure reads as control. 50 reframed the entire dispute as accountability. You mocked my documentary. Now let's talk about your rent. Real versus fake. Business versus performance. Now, some will say this is petty, that buying into a property conflict to flex online is excessive. And analytically, until verified deeds surface, it remains a public claim, not a courthouse fact. But here's why that counterpoint still struggles. In media warfare, timing beats paperwork. By declaring, "I own the joint," 50 placed Jim in the psychological position of a tenant answering to his rival. That image travels faster than any legal clarification ever could. And in the era of viral optics, image is leverage. Jim Jones' response is where this story stops being simple and starts feeling like a case study in narrative warfare. Let's start with the basics. Instead of denial, instead of outrage, instead of even a defensive statement, he leaned into spectacle. The video was short, 15, maybe 30 seconds, yet every second carried intent. Same outfit from the surveillance clip, same dark boots, same clothing that identified him with the moment 50 Cent had captured. But what really anchored the performance was the backdrop. A large TV screen playing The Last Dragon, the 1985 martial arts classic beloved in hip-hop culture. This was more than nostalgia. It was a wink to an audience that knew the layers. Here's culture, here's identity. Here's underdog triumph baked into action cinema. Psychologically, that combination hits on multiple fronts. Humor diffuses humiliation. Nostalgia sparks connection. The repeated martial arts strikes, exaggerated chopping motions, the theatrical kicks, all signaled confidence, control, and playfulness in a moment designed to humiliate him. At a human level, when someone laughs at a moment meant to expose them, it disrupts the attacker's intended narrative. The script 50 Cent had written, surveillance footage, lease notices, public humiliation, suddenly has a different author. Jones turned what could have been shame into persona. He became a character, Kung Fu Jim. Now let's unpack why this mattered culturally. Memes exploded within hours. Across Instagram, X, and YouTube, audiences replayed the clip, transformed the strikes into GIFs, layered captions like "No locked doors for Kung Fu Gym," and created fan art. Engagement didn't just spike, it detonated. For a brief moment, the spotlight shifted. Suddenly, the narrative was no longer just 50 Cent versus Jim Jones. It became performance versus performance, charisma versus aggression. One man had spent months weaponizing documentation, deadlines, and the optics of power. The other had taken the exact same footage and reframed it as entertainment. One played landlord, one played performer. But now let's take a surgical view, because virality does not erase liability. Data from recent content industry analyses show that independent media ventures, even popular ones, often operate on extremely thin margins. Studios, equipment, overhead, all in cities where commercial real estate is among the most expensive in the world. If the alleged arrears of $80,000 to $180,000 or possibly higher are even partially accurate, the underlying financial pressure did not vanish when the video went viral. No meme can pay rent. No persona can replace legal obligations. That's the cold, analytical truth. And yet, in the court of public perception, virality often outpaces reality. Jim Jones understood that. He didn't attempt to erase the narrative. He reframed it, showing control and turning exposure into opportunity. This is where humor becomes strategic. By laughing in the moment, he projected composure, not vulnerability. He inserted himself into the story as a participant rather than a passive subject. And in social media terms, that is the only defense that works in real time. Let's examine the details of the video itself, because every choice was deliberate. The outfit matching the surveillance footage made a direct visual connection. Yes, I am the man you saw, and yes, I own my reaction. The kicks and chops mirrored the aggression in the original footage, a symbolic counterpoint. You can catch me breaking in, but I can break back with style. The martial arts reference wasn't random. The Last Dragon is not just an action movie. It represents triumph against adversity, the clever underdog, and the fusion of cultural identity and physical skill. It's beloved in the same communities that follow hip-hop closely. By aligning himself with that narrative, Jim Jones transformed the risk of exposure into the power of cultural storytelling. At a psychological level, this resonates because audiences instinctively root for the underdog who maintains humor, control, and identity even when cornered. Jim made himself the hero of his own moment. And then there's timing. He didn't wait hours. He posted the video the same afternoon the footage and lease notice dropped. That speed is not coincidence. In digital culture, the first response shapes the narrative frame. Delay implies reaction, vulnerability, or panic. By responding immediately, Jones communicated confidence. He owned the story before the audience could fully internalize 50 Cent's intended narrative. That's textbook social media strategy, executed with instinct and creativity. In a war of optics, speed can equal power. Now let's layer in the broader context. This wasn't a sudden confrontation. The story traces back to late 2025 when the podcast criticized 50 Cent's Netflix documentary, calling it a mockumentary. That single word, mockumentary, was the spark. It implied fakery, performance over truth, and challenged 50 Cent's credibility. Many would have expected a diss track or public rebuttal, but 50 Cent responded with methodical precision. Leaked audio, memes highlighting financial struggles, the lease termination notice, and then the door footage. He built the crescendo over months. Psychologically, his strategy relied on eliciting an emotional reaction from Jones. If Jones responded angrily, 50 Cent would gain dominance. If he ignored it, the narrative still tilted toward 50 Cent's framing. Jones' choice to lean into humor disrupted the pattern. He denied the narrative the energy it needed to escalate, turning potential vulnerability into cultural currency. This also demonstrates a shift in how power is exercised in hip-hop culture. Historically, dominance was demonstrated through lyrical skill, diss tracks, or concerted media campaigns. Today, asset control, ownership, and digital perception are equally if not more potent weapons. The IFC Factory dispute exposed this shift. 50 Cent played landlord, leveraging the tangible asset of the building to frame accountability and control. Jim Jones played performer, leveraging narrative, culture, and humor to reclaim influence. One used property, one used perception. And in the court of public attention, perception often outweighs property, at least temporarily. If this trajectory continues, the next generation won't fear diss tracks or viral critiques. They'll fear losing operational control. Their studios, their distribution channels, their content pipelines. That's the uncomfortable truth few are ready to confront. Let's go deeper into the mechanics of this reframing. Humor works because it forces the audience to align with the actor's perception rather than the antagonist's. By performing exaggerated martial arts strikes, Jones invited the audience to laugh at the absurdity of the situation, not just at him. He reframed the tension as entertainment rather than conflict. Memes, shares, commentary, all amplified the frame, whereas 50 Cent's strategy relied on authority, legality, and visual proof of misconduct. Jones relied on emotional intelligence, narrative control, and cultural resonance. It's a textbook example of asymmetric engagement. One side leverages infrastructure, the other leverages human psychology. We can also analyze the secondary effect: fan engagement and cultural resonance. The Kung Fu video didn't just trend, it became a meme ecosystem. Comments praised creativity, reposts amplified reach. Even outlets that normally focus on legal or financial accountability had to acknowledge the cleverness of the response. This is significant because it demonstrates a key principle. In high-visibility conflicts, narrative control is as valuable as financial leverage. Jones transformed a potential defeat into an advantage. That's why the spotlight felt like his again, even if the underlying disputes, lease, arrears, ownership, remained unresolved. The moment, the performance, and the persona became a strategic asset in themselves. But let's balance emotion with cold analysis. Virality doesn't erase legal or financial exposure. Reports indicated potential back rent from $80,000 to $180,000. And while some payments were reportedly made, the underlying dispute persisted. Commercial real estate disputes in New York require formal proceedings. A social media claim or viral video cannot substitute for legal resolution. Yet the cultural impact of Jones' reframing is immediate. For the audience, he controlled the narrative. For 50 Cent, the escalation of visibility did not guarantee narrative supremacy. The interplay between performance and infrastructure created a dual-layered conflict that cannot be resolved by memes alone. Here, law and culture are operating in parallel, sometimes in alignment, often in tension. The takeaway extends beyond this specific beef. This is a blueprint for modern influence. One participant uses documentation and assets to assert authority. The other uses humor, timing, and narrative to reclaim attention. Both are playing with power, but in fundamentally different registers. If younger creators internalize this lesson, the next wave of conflicts will revolve less around artistry and more around who can control both perception and infrastructure simultaneously. The future battleground is as much about strategic storytelling as it is about music or personality. The next hip-hop power play won't be on stage or in the studio. It will be in the intersection of assets, narrative, and timing. Finally, consider the cultural psychology at work. Audiences are drawn to resilience, humor under pressure, and the ability to turn exposure into opportunity. At the same time, they are fascinated by structural dominance. Who owns the building, who controls the space, who dictates access? Jones' Kung Fu video captured both. The individual hero performing with flair and the broader narrative of control under pressure. That duality is why the moment resonated, why memes spread, and why the story became more than a viral clip. It became a cultural case study. So, when you watch that short Kung Fu video today, remember, it isn't just about a man hitting the air in dark boots. It's about strategy, perception, psychology, and timing. It's about flipping a moment of vulnerability into one of narrative power. It's about how modern conflicts in hip-hop, and really any high-visibility creative industry, now require mastery over both story and structure. And that's the part no one in the culture is fully ready to confront. Because in the end, the memes fade, the jokes circulate, but the power dynamics, the control over space, visibility, and audience, that is what lasts. Jim Jones' response is where this story stops being a simple feud and starts reading like a masterclass in narrative warfare. When 50 Cent dropped the surveillance footage, the lease termination notice, and a claim to partial ownership of the IFC Factory, most would expect outrage, defensiveness, or silence. Instead, Jones turned the moment into theater. The video he posted that same afternoon was brief, 15 to 30 seconds, but every second was deliberate. Same outfit as the surveillance clip, same dark boots, the same presence 50 Cent had captured. Behind him, The Last Dragon played on a giant screen, a cultural wink that immediately resonated with hip-hop audiences. This wasn't random humor. It was strategy. Psychologically, humor diffuses humiliation. When someone laughs at a moment designed to shame them, they disrupt the attacker's script. Jones didn't just respond. He became the author of the story. Kung Fu Jim was born. The genius lies in how he layered meaning. Matching the surveillance outfit sent a signal. Yes, I am here. I own my reaction. The martial arts strikes mirrored the aggression from the original footage, transforming forced entry into performance. By referencing a beloved film, Jones anchored the moment culturally, turning potential humiliation into shared experience. Audiences didn't just watch someone react. They witnessed someone reclaim authority. Memes and reposts exploded within hours. And for a fleeting moment, the spotlight was back on him. He had seized the narrative before it could define him. But we need to slow down. Virality doesn't erase liability. Independent media ventures in cities like New York operate on razor-thin margins. If the alleged arrears, estimates between $80,000 and $180,000, were accurate, the financial pressure remained. Memes don't pay rent. Persona doesn't repair doors. That's the cold, analytical truth. Yet in the court of public perception, Jones' reframing gave him power. One man used paperwork. One man used charisma. One played landlord. One played performer. And the audience, they were watching the latter dominate in real time. Timing amplified the effect. By responding immediately, Jones avoided appearing reactive. In digital culture, speed frames perception. Delay signals weakness. Swiftness signals control. Psychologically, audiences gravitate toward resilience under pressure. Research in crisis communication shows that those who project composure and humor retain audience loyalty far more than those who react with anger or fear. Jones' laughter was a calculated signal. He had turned exposure into opportunity. Now, consider the cultural coding. The Last Dragon is more than an action movie. It represents triumph, cleverness, and identity. By performing in front of it, Jones was narrating resilience, reclaiming the moment, and aligning with cultural mythology. The footage that could have been a story of embarrassment became the origin story of a persona the audience could celebrate. Virality followed instantly. Memes, reposts, and commentary solidified the narrative shift, turning a potentially negative moment into cultural capital. Contrast this with 50 Cent's approach. He had spent months building context. The mockumentary comment about his Netflix documentary, leaked audio about back rent, memes highlighting financial struggle, the lease termination, the surveillance footage, and finally the ownership claim. His strategy was methodical, evidence-based, and escalating. He relied on tangible authority, documentation, property, deadlines, to provoke a reaction. But Jones refused to play that game. By leaning into humor, he neutralized 50's emotional leverage, turning the attack into a stage for performance.